Yeah, I was born and bred in Hampstead, except for being evacuated during the war. But it was actually right on the back of Hampstead Heath. And actually Hampstead Heath is the most wonderful bit of kind of open parkland, very close to the centre of London in effect. And so my childhood adventure playground was Hampstead Heath. I was sent to a little private school in the south of England at the beginning of the war because my mum was working and a single parent. And then the school en masse was evacuated to Kirkby Lonsdale. And so I spent 2 years in Kirkby Lonsdale, and during the holidays my grandmother had come up and would either rent a cottage or what have you. And so, I started wandering then at a very young age in the Lake District. Yeah. And none of my family had ever climbed or anything like that. But my grandfather actually lived in Dublin, and I'd go on holiday there. And so I then, when I was 15, when I went there, I started getting a bus out to the Wicklow Hills and doing a little bit of walking there. And of course noticed these big mountains on the way back in the train from Holyhead to London. And so at the age of 16, with a mate from school, we hitchhiked up to Capel, hadn't got a clue, chose the toughest winter for years and tried to climb Snowdon. And from Penny Pass, I think up the pig track, but you couldn't see it. And we were avalanched off. So the whole Bonington story could have ended then and there, but it didn't. I was fine. Anton, my mate, hitchhiked home the next day and never went into the mountains again. And I was totally hooked. And that's where it all started. And then I found a friend of the family who'd done a bit of climbing. And my first climb ever was at Harrison Rocks, which of course is just south of London near Tunbridge Wells. When you're 16, you think 40 is pretty ancient. And certainly, of course, in those days, I think there was a much greater perception of the effects of age. You didn't have, as you have now, the wonderful thing today, if you go wandering in the Lake District hills at this time of year, there's just dozens of whiteheads and greyheads like myself wandering the fells. Back in the 50s, you wouldn't see that to anything like such a degree. So no, and anyway, I couldn't really foresee the future 10 years ahead, let alone 50. I joined the army, went to Sandhurst, and it was then that I got abroad for the first time. I was stationed in North Germany. And so I got down to the Alps and I started climbing in the Alps then. And I was a good climber. And so I started doing very hard routes in the Alps. But then my focus was still very much Alpine, not Himalayan. And then through being in the army once again, I had my first Himalayan expedition, a service expedition, to a mountain called Annapurna 2, which is a big mountain. It's only a few metres below 8,000 metres, and climbed it. But even then, this is 1960, and then the following year, 1961, we made the first ascent of Nuptse, third peak of Everest. But I was still much more interested in the Alps, and in fact in 61, travelled back overland, and I was arranged to meet up with Don Mullins, one of the greatest climbers I think that we've ever produced. And the two of us wanted to climb the north wall of the Eiger. The weather was lousy, we didn't, but we did make the first ascent to the central pillar of Fresnay. And it was these hard alpine climbs that excited me. And of course it was making the first British ascent to the north wall of the Eiger in 1962 that gave me the opportunity of making a living around climbing. I never thought I could do that. And it was only really in 1970, when I got back into expedition climbing and led the expedition to the southwest face of Everest, and it was only then that, I got a real focus on Himalayan climbing. And it was really the 70s, 80s, and, to the last few years, that, that was my passion, getting out of the Himalayas every year and doing new routes. And so I got a group of mates at the time who were, amongst the best climbers in Britain, and we'd all talked about going on an expedition and we were looking for someone to organise it and lead it for us, and that person didn't turn up. And so by default, I said, what the hell, I'd better do it myself. And got the idea of climbing the South Face of Annapurna. And then that led on, naturally, to the next logical big challenge was the southwest face of Everest that had already been attempted 3 times. And so we had an attempt in 1972, which we didn't succeed in, but learnt a lot. And then in 1975, of course, I led the expedition that actually climbed it. Attempt number 1 was in 1972. Yeah. Attempt number 2 was 1975, when I had thought, well, maybe, I'll be able to get up it. But if you're leading a large and complicated expedition, your role as leader is not particularly to climb the mountain. That's an indulgence. Your aim, your job, is to make sure that the expedition works. And so that's what I did. And of course it was Doug Scott and Dougal Haston that made the first ascent. Then in 1982 we went back with a very small team. There was Peter Boardman, Joe Tasker, Dick Renshaw and myself. So we tried to climb the huge unclimbed northeast ridge of Everest as a foursome. And it was just too much. And of course, tragically, at the end, Peter Boardman and Joe Tasker made one last go for the summit and vanished high on the mountain. So I still hadn't climbed it. And I never thought I was losing, and you never get hardened to losing friends. And after that, I didn't think I'd go back to Everest. And then this Norwegian friend of mine, Arne Næss, was a multimillionaire in shipping and a climber. And he wanted to organise and lead and finance the first ever Norwegian expedition to Everest. But they never climbed an 8,000 metre peak, and Arne got me in as a member of the team, but to do a lot of work on the planning and the logistics, and just doing the South Col route, and I got up it. Pure luck. I mean, and if you talk to any kind of extreme high altitude climber, I think every single one of them has got to admit that they're lucky to be alive. You're pushing the boundaries so far where a single mistake can actually get you killed. And I mean, I know, gosh, I mean, in my climbing career, I mean, there's been at least 10 occasions when I was unbelievably lucky to survive. So no, it's pure luck. Well, if it's a fall, you don't really have much time to think about it. I mean, the closest call I've had, I think, or the 2 close calls I've had of falling, one was on a mountain called Panchuli, when we'd had a bit of an epic. Stephen Venables had had an abseil fall, and he'd gone about 80 metres and had broken his leg very badly, and most of the team were, well, there were only 5 of us anyway, were lowering him down, but 2 of us were actually carrying all the expedition gear down. So I had a huge, great rucksack on my back. We were soloing down because we were using all our ropes to get Stephen down, and I lost my footing, and it was a long snow slope, and I went about 1,000 feet. And it was just tumbling down, and I caught my ice. The biggest danger on that kind of fall, if unless it's hitting something solid, is your ice tools. And I've always kept my ice tools on very loose slings so that I lose them if I fall off, which I did, thank goodness. I just got one cut over here, and miraculously got to the boat, didn't hit anything on the way down, and it was a decent run out, so I just actually got down to the bottom of that face about 3 hours in front of the others. And I think the most recent time, which I was unbelievably lucky, was actually in Scotland with my brother, and we were climbing on Loch Nagar. We were doing Parallel Gully B, which is kind of classic grade 5, and we'd done all the hard bits. I'd taken very bad belays and was just taking up the last pitch. My brother was a big guy, fell off, and he pulled me straight off the stance and and I had ice axe belays that were pulled out. So I was hurtling down headlong, and we had just one runner in, which was just a number 6 rock jammed into a crack, and miraculously it held. And But I must say, as I hurtled down, I definitely thought that was it. Totally, completely and utterly. I mean, she gave me all the support one could ever want. She was a fantastic mum to her children, and she was a wonderful companion, my best friend, and yeah, I miss her. Going right back, I mean, one of my very early, if you like, heroes is A.F. Mummery. And he was a climber of the late 19th century who was just years and years ahead of his time. In the 19th century, well, I mean, we invented kind of climbing in a way, but it tended to be always with guides. And A.F. Mummery particularly broke away from that and was doing incredibly bold, guideless ascents in the Alps. And then he went off, in fact, and tried to climb Nanga Parbat. And he was trying to climb at Alpine style. And at that stage they knew nothing about the problems of altitude, acclimatization or anything. And I think the two very great climbers, and arguably amongst the kind of small pantheon of brilliant world climbers, Joe Brown and Don Willans. And it was really the start also of a kind of working class revolution, in that before the war there were a few working class climbers, but the trouble is it was a 6-day week. They had to work so hard, they had so little money. But with the war they had a little bit more time. There was the 5-day week, and in actual fact they had an advantage over the Oxbridge climbers because most of them were doing manual jobs. I mean, both Joe and Don had been plumbers, were apprentice plumbers, and they were getting to the crags. And they had a genius. Leo is a wonderful adventure climber, and he's also, though, in his passion for climbing, he's actually managed to make once again a living around it. Don't worry about the end project, don't you? Whether it's to climb Everest by a new route or anything like that, or to be famous. Just let all that happen, because the key thing is just to climb for the love of it. Well, my ambition in the next 10 years is to actually kind of keep walking and climbing, being very aware that, I mean, that as you get older, your climbing standard goes down, but just to keep climbing as long as, because I just love doing it. I love the mountains, I love the companionship, I love the people I climb with, and so I think it's just to live life to the full.